Welcome to part 2, where we dive into the transformative world of robotics and AI.
Welcome to the High Performance CEO Show.
Just last week, Devin was released. This AI, which is used to create code. Completely autark, scrapping the internet, looking up for API documentation, putting it into a code. I really ask myself, how will we create value in the future? How do we create our living? Everything is done robots and AI. That's the crazy thing. And in the same way, we have lots of strike at the moment in Germany. The U-Bahn, the S-Bahn are not going because people want more money, want less work. As you said, it's just accelerating that robots will drive the trains in the future.
Yeah, and lay the tracks and you name it. Well, and so it's interesting you say that because I have an interesting story, and this is a true thing that happened. So one of my early engineers, Abhishek, I wasn't there at the time. Somehow he got left at a job site overnight. Like he just didn't say anything. Ended up sleeping in their break room. And so he was rudely awakened by some furious factory worker, big guy, just standing over him, screaming at him. Abhishek wakes up and he's like, "What's happening?" And the guy's like, "Did you do this?" He's like pointing at the robot. And Abhishek goes, "Yeah, I put the robot in." And the guy's just fuming. He goes, "How would you feel if a robot took your job?" And Abhishek foolishly goes, "Oh, that'd be great. I would just stay home and play video games all day." So this makes this dude furious. So this guy's freaking out. So they call me because I've got to come in. I've learned a lot on how to do this responsibly and right by making a lot of mistakes. And so I end up going out to the factory and I'm like, I calm the guy down. I go, "Listen," I was like, "if you won the lottery tomorrow, like, what do you love to do? What are some of your hobbies?" And the guy was like, "Well, I like to fish." And I was like, "Well, let me ask you a question." Because we were getting into this deep discussion on he was angry about the robot, but it was a bunch of other things that he'd been internalizing too. And the robot was just it was like a wall. Like he couldn't see past what it represented or what it meant. He only saw the negatives. And I go, "How many days do you work here?" He goes, "I work here 5 days. Sometimes I pick up an extra day." And I go, "Well, what if I paid you the same, but you only had to work here 2 days a week and you worked with the robots, you produced just as much. And then for another day or two of the week, I paid you to fish." And he was like, "You'd pay me to fish?" And I was like, "Yeah, but there's one caveat. There's a lot of kids in my city that don't have a dad. I want you to mentor them. I'll pay you, but I want you to teach them how to fish, teach them life lessons, spend time with them." And I was like, "Would you do that?" And he goes, "Well, yeah, I would do that." I was like, "Is that a life that you would want? And you feel like you make a difference. You're making the same money, if not more. And you have a chance to do your job and then actually have it in." Right. And he was like, "Yeah, I would love that." And I was like, that's what that robot can represent. I was like, it can free us up to be more human. Now, I'm not a universal basic income kind of a guy. Now, what I am is I do believe we spend a lot of time, and I go through debate with folks. They're like, we need to tax the rich. And that is a losing battle. They will always find a way to do loopholes. There's a reason they're billionaires. But what you're doing is looking in the wrong place. Well, we don't need to tax the rich more. We need to make it so that if you don't make a lot of money, your quality of life is higher. We're not going to be able to redistribute all the money. But if you can say, all right, you make $20,000 a year, but you live like you make $100,000, that's what robots could do. We're already in an age of abundance. Robots could just bring it in. So again, I don't want to just give people money, but I do think we should eradicate homelessness. We should use AI and robotics. Everybody has health insurance. We should make sure that everybody has food. Those basic needs are met, right? But then you still have a purpose. There's other things that you have to do and things like that. And if you want to grow businesses or you want to have more money or go on vacations or whatever, then you work and you do that. But I think making sure that we eradicate some of those basic needs, we should do that. But I do think people need a purpose. So if we're going to say robots and AI can do all of this stuff that we used to value, and we say we value things like charity work, but we expect people to do it for free, I think what we do is we use the robots. We work humans and robots working hand in hand. We create this age of abundance. We keep the economy going, tax the robots, whatever you want to do. Doesn't matter to me. We can figure out creative ways to do this and then pay people to be good citizens. In one generation, could we solve all these problems? And I'm like, yeah, we keep jobs going. It's just now we have more jobs. We're paying people to be good people now, right? So now their motivations are aligned with that. The robots allow them to have more impact. I don't know if you've ever worked in a factory, but I always go in and work the line because I like to learn the nuances.
I did all kinds of jobs as a student.
Right.
Night shift, everything.
Right. And I'll go and work it for a day. And I'm like, this is the worst day of my life. I can't putting these things in a box and twisting a thing. And I was like, who wouldn't want to do this? Your brain atrophies. Humans shouldn't be doing that. People tell me all the time, well, robots are going to take people's jobs. And I was like, people have been doing robots' jobs. Like, you know
Exactly.
what I
Yeah.
mean? Like the human capacity is amazing. But if you're not flexing, it's often like guys like you and me, or I'm in academic circles, and they talk about things like, well, humans have always adapted and humans have always done this. And do you remember the movie I, Robot with Will Smith?
Yes.
And where he's like interrogating the robot, and he's like, can a robot create a symphony? Can a robot paint a painting? All things that robots can do now. Like, we can get into that later. But the thing that I love is the robot looks back at him and goes, well, can you? And the reality is Will Smith couldn't. So it's very easy.
Yeah.
And now we can get into some of the things that we actually have to do to make sure that everybody, like, I'm glad we're getting kind of going into this, like the kinds of things we should be doing discussion. Because when people say things like, well, can a robot do this? And AI can't do this. Humans are great at this, and AI is never going to do this. I was like, what you mean is 0.00001% of humans can do that. Because you are using the exceptions as the rule. Like, I'm not worried about it's one of the reasons why I didn't focus on creating more startups in New York. Like, I very quickly was like, yeah, I don't need a bunch of like coders in a cool building. What I'm worried about is all of the people that have no idea this stuff is happening. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't want to create more startups. I want to figure out, like, how do I make sure that everyone who's non-technical gets brought along with this? Entrepreneurs will be fine. Like, they'll figure it out. They've always been fine, right? I'm not worried about them. I'm worried about the people that are working in the factories or aren't sitting down and having discussions like this. They have no idea that this is even happening. That was my motivation. And so everything that I've kind of done in my life around robotics and around AI has always had this helping people at its core. And candidly, between you and I'm not doing this because I'm a martyr, and I don't believe I'm a missionary of some kind of robotics or that level.
I mean, you're an entrepreneur.
Right. And so I actually do believe, though, that when the time comes and demand for robots explodes, it's already coming, but soon it will be everywhere, that having started the company, like, that puts people first in the robotic space will end up being very valuable later on. Like, I have a track record of caring, being involved in communities, helping people. I think if you hit a point where you've got to use robots, you're going to want to work with the company that's community focused. And so that's always been kind of my mantra, is like, I could make more money in the short term, but in the long term, the value is going to far outpace the money that I could have made before, because I'm people centric with robotics. Does that make sense?
Totally. I mean, we cannot stop robotics rising and taking over jobs and activities. But what we can do is actually what you said. We can create a way that's human centric and that we support people along the way. It's an amazing vision.
Yeah. And it's a really exciting time to be alive. So through a lot of this, and again, because I've been able to like abstract myself more from like a community focus, which sometimes is a little sad. I was very involved, but the reality is a lot of it was exhausting. It was very exhausting. And the truth is now there's so many opportunities and things moving so quickly that it's like, it was good that I cut my teeth on this and I learned a lot and I figured things out. But the opportunity now is so large. It's not just about one place anymore. Like, it can be anywhere. And so feeding into that. So obviously I've got my engineers in Argentina. We have York Exponential, which is our robotics company. We started doing what are called collaborative robots. So those are human-sized robots or smaller, designed to work next to people, not replace them. Now we do anything from collaborative robots to big industrial systems that are as big as a house. So anything from like hundreds of $1,000 projects to multi-million. So that's what York Exponential does. And obviously I have my Argentinian company and I have the company here, and they're working seamlessly. But I wanted to make sure that, again, I reached everybody and that everyone was a part of it. So I'm also a published author. So I just brought out my first children's book called Tim the Robot Wizard. And actually, I'll talk about it right now. So I don't know if you can see it. So I'll make sure that you get a copy of it. So if any of your listeners,
Tim the Robot Wizard.
The Robot Wizard. Yeah, it's really neat. So it's a cool story. So I don't know if you're familiar with, do you know who Goodwill is? I'm not sure if you all have. So Goodwills are they're kind of like thrift stores here in the United States, but they're nonprofits. And their main mission is to help people. And so one of the CEOs, he was the Kansas and Missouri CEO. It was called MoCan Goodwill. He was doing his master's thesis on the future of work, and he had a panic attack because he realized everyone they were training for jobs, they were training the working poor. They were basically training people to get replaced by robots, because he'd never thought about this stuff, and he was seeing it. And so he had basically a panic attack, and he was having a little bit of a meltdown. And he ended up having tacos with a mutual friend. So I'd never met him before, but my friend Johnny in Kansas City. And Ed was just lamenting the fact that all these people were going to be out of work and AI and robots were going to take over, and he didn't know what to do. And he goes, you need to talk to my friend John, because John has a big passion around this. He started a school, and I think you guys would get along really well. So he ended up bringing me out. We ended up doing an AI project with them. So it was the first AI. It was really interesting. So we developed an AI that could defects, composition, pricing of like one-off donated clothing, because they had a lot of one-off clothing. It was very subjective. And so we had an AI that could do this. But it was the first AI that while we built it, we didn't train it. We taught people that were Goodwill participants to train it. So we had people like single moms, people with disabilities. Like it was the first neural net trained by not only non-technical, but people with, like I said, disabilities and barriers to entry. So we were really proud of it. It was like, I mean, it was a really interesting system. It worked, but it opened the door to do a lot of other things in Kansas with Goodwill. Our missions aligned very much. Like they wanted to make sure that everybody was included. For me, in the United States, there's a Goodwill, I think, within 15 minutes of 85% of all Americans. So it was a great channel. I could reach lots and lots of people. So part of this was they wanted to raise some money for something called the Artemis Initiative. So they ended up starting another school, and it was all skill sets in the fourth industrial revolution. I ended up coming out. We ended up raising a little over $1 million to do this. And part of my job was I testified in the Missouri House and Senate, same thing in Kansas. And then also I had to give like a bunch of presentations in a row to stakeholders and government officials and stuff like that. And at one of these events, I was about to get on stage, and one of our program participants came and sat next to me. His name is Tim Starr, and Tim has Down syndrome. And we taught him how to program the robots, and like he was teaching other people how to program robots and do like annotating for all the data. And he goes, "Are you nervous?" And I go, "No, I think I'm okay. I do this quite a bit." He goes, "Well, you shouldn't be nervous. I believe in you." And he goes, "If anyone gives you any crap, you send them to me." And I was like, all right. So he gave me a fist bump and went back to his seat. So I get up and I give my presentation, and it goes well. After the presentation, me and Ed are talking to these elected officials and foundations and people trying to get money from them. But nobody's watching us anymore. Everybody's looking at Tim. Tim had figured out how to get one of our little robots to follow him with like hand gestures and sign language. And he's getting this robot. It's weaving in and out of the crowd. Everybody's watching him going like this and stopping it and moving it around. And then he just stops and he throws his hands in the air and he goes, "I am Tim, the robot wizard." And I was like, that's the coolest thing I've ever seen. So that's what the book's about. The book is actually about me. So in the book, I'm Johnny Robotics. So essentially, I meet Tim in Kansas City. He becomes my apprentice. I take him all over the world and then into space to meet all these different robots that are doing things to help people. But the whole crux of the book is responsible disruption. Like that we need to be making sure that everyone's included in it. But one of the things that I love the most, which is kind of the thing I'll talk about next, is so I was one of the very early testers of Midjourney. So I'm sure a lot of your listeners are familiar with Midjourney. I mean, it's really cool. I mean, the technology itself is neat. But when I first started using it, it was in that nightmare phase. Do you remember when it was like just everything that it created was this horrifying monster, like a disaster? And so,
Oh yeah, I remember.
right. And so in my mind, I wanted the book to be made with AI. Like nobody was using it back then. And like I said, everybody was naysaying, going, "Oh, it's terrible with hands and it can't do anything." And so for like 3 or 4 weeks, it was creating pretty terrifying stuff. I actually kept a lot of it because they're cool art pieces. But then after about 3 weeks, I was training it at night. It started to create really cool images, like all this really unique stuff that I never would have thought of, even as I was a professional photographer. So it's not like this is a new world to me. So it did these weird, cool things that I never would have expected. Here's when I meet Tim and there's robots flying everywhere. And like, so this was really cool because I was like a man floating above an arena. And what it did is, so it put me floating and then it did a hologram of my head. And I was like, it was because it didn't quite understand what I was asking, but it was just doing this really cool stuff. All of a sudden, 2 weeks later, I wake up and I try and get it to do it. So Midjourney opened the beta to the public. It looked like a person did it. I couldn't get it to do this anymore. And so it's like the book is this frozen moment. Like I call it early AI. Like it's a very distinct art style that doesn't exist anymore. It's like this frozen moment in history. So that's what the book's about. Like that's the whole concept is like as a social piece, it actually has some kind of relevancy to like when the AI needed us holding its hand. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Watch a couple of TED Talks, which are a year or 1.5 years old. Yeah. I mean, they talk about breakthroughs, which are now standard.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. The book is cool though, but it's also, like I said, it's a way for parents and kids to not just both learn about robotics and AI, but that concept of responsible disruption is all through the book.
I love this phrase, responsible disruption.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been a thing I've been talking about. Like I said, I saw in all the little towns, the thesis I had about the first industrial revolution, the second, the third becoming caretaker versus risk taker. During those 2 years when I traveled the United States, it was almost like every town was exactly the same. It had the same people, the same families. It was like this blueprint, and you could see that is exactly what happened, right? And so I look at this and I'm like, all right, we need to embrace the technology, but we need to do it responsibly. I don't want to be like a Google or a Facebook that uses everybody's data, does all this stuff, and then at the end spends all the money on PR and marketing to make it sound like they didn't know they were doing these things. So I wanted to always put it at the forefront. Now, to piggyback on that, we actually did a lot of cool stuff with Tim. I alluded to the HoloLens earlier. So we did some tests where like Tim would wear the HoloLens at work. He'd come in, it would look like Iron Man, like his day would pop up. Like, I mean, we were doing all kinds of cool stuff. Haptic feedback vest. It was all this stuff that was like bleeding edge is now very quickly becoming going to be a mainstay. Now, one of the things that makes me the most excited about this is all of the people, like, so Tim works for a restaurant called Anton's. Everyone there loves him. He's always on time. He's a hard worker. He just needs a little help. And this technology, like we're starting to train an AI to be an assistant for people with disabilities because there's going to be things that the robots can't do. And honestly, a lot of Americans don't want to do this other stuff. If we can use technologies like the Apple Vision Pro and AI to kind of be an assistant for folks like Tim, all of a sudden, Tim becomes critical to our infrastructure and it drastically changes people's opinion of his value. And that's the kind of stuff we should be using AI for and robotics for, is empowering people, not immediately thinking about what is it going to take away. We need to be thinking about what is it going to add.
Yeah, it's leveraging capabilities of people. It's increasing effectiveness and efficiency. And we can do so much more by using these tools and using large language models. And well, if our employers realize that ChatGPT is actually something valuable to learn.
Right.
Put this into the training budget, please.
Well, so the funny thing is, and we should talk a little more on this, because I have a licensed college, I can actually run things through my school that qualify for state funding. And like it actually does qualify because it's a licensed college. So we should talk a little bit about that. It's one of the reasons I kept the license. While the robot mechanics are a piece of it, it essentially was supposed to be an on-ramp for everybody. Like that was the goal, is skills like the kinds of stuff we're talking about. So the book kind of is that. I also have a nonprofit called the Fortress Initiative that is all focused on making sure people don't get left behind in the fourth industrial revolution. But whenever something weird happens, I get asked to go on the radio or TV. And the last one was ChatGPT. When it came out, everybody was freaking out. So I ended up going on NPR, which is our national public radio here. And it was so well received, like my interview, that PBS gave me my own TV show. So public broadcasting here. It's all going to be a show. It's 8 episodes. It's all on generative AI and artificial intelligence and how it's going to impact everything from not just the economy, but to education, to religion. Like I'm interviewing priests. Like what does it mean if AI can create longevity and then cure death? Like, I mean, there's all of these things where it's not like you can just say, well, I'm not techie. Like the AI and the robots, it's going to be everywhere and deep in everything. And it's going to make us rethink what it means to be a human, right? I mean, and so that's what the show is. I'm excited because it's a cool format. So I do a longer form podcast, but what we do is I'll talk to someone for like an hour, a couple hours, and then we'll pull snippets from the podcast and those become the prompts for what we're going to create. So the whole show is going to be generative AI created. We're really leaning into it. We're embracing it. We're going to deep fake it into every other language. So the rest of the world learns all at the same time. But the reality is it's going to very much like the book, right? Has a distinct look. I love the fact that the tools we're using are going to look quirky, right? They're going to have this weird, uncanny
That's a snapshot again. You know,
it's a frozen moment,
piece of history,
right?
Yeah.
And so that's what makes me really excited about kind of like this transition. Like everything I'm trying to do, I'm trying to keep that responsible disruption and a thing that's like weaving a narrative with visuals, with all of these things together so that people can understand because they can see it. Exposure is critical. I mean, we saw what happened when only a small part of our society could computer program. Like everybody went to Silicon Valley, all the money went there, but this tech is going to be everywhere.
It's democratized tech,
right?
Basically, it's available for everyone. It's available for free. I mean, everyone can log into ChatGPT and use it, create it. It's available. That's the power.
It's an amazing time. I actually, so one of the things before I did that particular interview, I ended up doing it was an emergency board meeting for a college. And because all the students were cheating with ChatGPT, and like higher ed is having this existential crisis right now, which they should be, right? And so they brought me in to basically explain to them what was happening, where this was going, get my thoughts and feedback. So I ended up giving this presentation to these like 20 plus board members. And one of the administrators who was there said, well, I think what we're going to do is we're going to ban the use of ChatGPT and we're going to force all of the students to like to not use the AI, and we want them to still learn this way, and we need to separate it. And I was like, as an employer, I can promise you, if you do that, I will never hire one graduate from your college, because I don't actually care how good they are without the AI. Like, I don't care at all how good they are without the AI. You know what I mean? Like, it's the difference if like someone is great at woodworking,
Exactly.
right? But I'm hiring them to build houses. Like, I don't care how good you are, like whittling and all of these little things. I need to build lots of houses very quickly. So I think what's going to happen is, and this will be the weird thing, right? Because we had the discussion where, that the company is like, oh, ChatGPT isn't an approved, which is bananas to me, right? But what's going to happen is you're going to get people using it. And this is happening right now. Like, they interviewed all the C-suites, and like all the C-suites are like, AI is going to be a big deal. We need to lean into it. We need to start using it. None of them had, though, like a plan on how to implement it. But something like, I don't know, 65% of the employees were already using it. They just weren't telling leadership, right? And so
it's called shadow IT. Everyone has their own logins, and then they're uploading data to the public ChatGPT.
yeah, but the interesting
Exactly.
thing is, when the leadership finally does catch on, right, and the boards catch on that you can use this, right now people think, oh, well, this is great because I'm doing like a full week's worth of work in a day. And it's like, as soon as the companies figure this out, we are about to enter the age of hyper productivity. Like, now my expectations will be that instead of
4 weeks.
right? Yeah, that in 1 week you do 4 weeks worth of work, and that's coming. Like, that time is coming very soon, which is why it's so critical that everybody starts to at least mess around with these tools, right? Like, learn what
we have to educate.
Because the expectation, like I said, I don't care how good you are without the AI. I don't care at all. All I care about is you and the AI together. What can you produce?
What are the results?
Right. Right. And so it's an exciting time to be alive, but we need to be very intentional. You know how like before kind of tech was developed and there were all these like ripple effects that we didn't take into account, like with social media and disinformation. It's like we messed up those things. I can't, what's about to happen is going to make that stuff pale in comparison. And so when I say the next 5 years will impact the next 5 years might impact the rest of humanity. Because if you look at it speeding up now, 1 year is worth 20 years of innovation. Do you know what I mean? Like, it used to take all this time to get things done, and now it's shortening and shortening. I mean, I can't imagine in 5 years, it's going to be like the speed of thought. Like, things are going to happen and morph so quickly. Now, that gets into a couple other discussions because people often say, well, human beings have always adapted. And it's like, yeah, but even so, I was in the Marines and I was trained to be in combat, right? And we had great training. The Marines in the US were considered like the best of the best, first in to fight. But even we can't be in war indefinitely. Do you know what I mean? Where it's just you never get a break. And the tech is moving so quickly that it's not about can human beings adapt, it's can we adapt fast enough? Because the speed at which it's going to happen. So that leads into the questions of like, okay, well, then are we going to have a chip in our brain? Are some people going to have a chip in our brain and other people go, I'm not going to? And that's where that chasm of
this gap, is widening.
Right.
Exactly.
And these are things, it's funny because you and I kind of live in this, right? So we're, riffing and just talking. And some of the stuff we're talking about, and I used to say this in my presentations a lot, is people at the end would go to me, they go, man, that was riveting. It was entertaining. People in general like to be scared. You know what I mean? It's like a roller coaster kind of a thing. And I'm a pretty good public speaker. And so I'm able to tell this story, but they would inevitably come up at the end. It doesn't happen as much now. They would go, man, John, can tell you're really passionate about robotics and AI. You really care about this stuff. But I'm going to be honest with you. You're talking about robots and AI and all this stuff, and we're dealing with this stuff right now. Like, you're too far in the future. We've got these problems we need to fix. And
sci-fi,
right.
Yeah.
And I would tell them, and I did my presentation specifically for this reason. I was like, 99% of what I just showed you is not the future. It is the past. Like, and it terrifies me that decision makers can look me in the eye. I can show them things that have already happened. And they're like, it's not going to happen for a long time. I'm like, but it already did happen. Like, I'm showing you that this is the past. This isn't the future. Now, the stuff that you and I are talking about, even on this, people are thinking it's science fiction. It's like, no, this stuff is happening
no, it's not.
right now.
It's reality.
Yeah.
It's there. It's just not common knowledge
Yeah.
yet, and it's not that widespread,
Yeah.
but it's happening. It's all there. This is why we need to educate.
Yep.
We need to continue and share this, go in conversation like that, yeah, and tell the world what's happening out
Yeah.
there.
Well, and that's so for the TV show. It's one of the exciting things is to produce what we're going to produce would have cost a lot more money, like millions of dollars a couple years ago. It's going to be a fraction of that. The technology to actually deep fake it into other languages is here for the first time, right? So the upside of this is the technology is going to be everywhere very quickly, but we have the technology now to make sure everyone is exposed very quickly. Like that's the upside is like, if we do this right and we harness the technology, we can't afford to do what we did before. Like with the internet and like nobody knew what was going to happen and social media creates depression cycles and suicide, like all of these things that happened. We have that from recent history. So we can learn those lessons and apply them very quickly. Like I said, responsible disruption, making sure we're doing, but the cool thing is the tech that's coming out, that's going to be everywhere, can help us make sure everyone's included. And that was never possible before. You had to be a Google that raised billions of dollars. You had to be like these big monsters, right? You and I are doing this now, right? Like I think Sam Altman was saying that we're going to be at the first, like, was it like 1 or 3 person unicorn?
Yeah, $1 billion company with one employee.
And that's possible. Like we're hitting this point now where like things that you needed tons and tons of money. And that's like the cool thing about it, right? Is the democratization of it. The bad part is, like I said, the lack of exposure to what this, not what the technology is, because you don't need to be a technologist anymore. Like you don't have to go to school for this stuff. Like you don't have to have a 4-year degree. So that's the exciting thing. The bad side of it is people still in their minds are like, well, I'm not a techie, so that doesn't concern me.
I will never understand this. They have all these limiting beliefs about AI and the usage.
I can promise you, and I went through this, and you may have gone through this as well. I was trying to work with a software development shop, and I was interviewing them for like a side project that I had going on, and I'm telling them what we want to accomplish, and they're like coming back with these quotes for like $50,000. I was like, and like timelines of 6 months. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, I was like, why? They're like, well, this is our process, and now we're hitting a point that it's almost more detrimental for you to be a technologist.
This mindset, how you did this in the past, all the development cycles, and now boom, you can get it in an afternoon.
Right, and you should, right? Hyper productivity. I was telling them, and there'd be things they're like, well, we need to do this, we need to build this, and I was like, yeah, don't, just wait a month and it'll be here. And they're like, they were telling me like I'm crazy, and then it's like, okay, and then the custom GPTs come out, and I'm like, see, like, and it's not hard, like. I'm very good at like seeing the curves, right? Like it's been a strength of mine. I saw it with the photography business. I saw it with the new people coming in. Like I'm very good at leveraging it and seeing it. I can see now about 5 years in the future, I think. I can see how things are connecting this, but we're going to hit a point very soon where I'm not going to be able to tell you what's going to happen next week, let alone like in 10 years. And so that pace of rapid change is coming very quickly. And like I said, being a technologist now, like it is almost a hurdle that you have to get over. And that's the exciting part. Now, the scary part is we have idolized entrepreneurs and technologists in our communities at such a high level, right? That it makes people that aren't in that bucket feel like they can't participate in that world. And that's the exciting thing about right now is you're getting people with domain expertise or community knowledge that can then start leveraging these tools that you used to have to be a Google. And the cool thing is they're going to be doing things that like a team of the best software engineers in the world would never even think of because they're so far removed from that. That was the downside of Silicon Valley. Like there were a lot of times I did think about moving there. Being seen as a lunatic consistently is incredibly lonely. It's like, it's demoralizing. Like you've got to keep yourself excited. You're seeing like you have 10 heads when like what you went through with the company that's like, oh, well, ChatGPT is not an approved whatever. And it's like, you're like, are you crazy? And it's like that feeling, like that was my feeling every day that I'm a lunatic. I'm a lunatic. And now I'm hitting this point where it's like, no, I've been validated. Everybody else now is crazy. Like, this stuff, it's like, how can you just see it and ignore it? And that's where I think like these conversations need to happen. Often, and everywhere. This is the first time that now I get my mom sending me articles and stuff, which cracks me up because my mom's like, did you know this is going to happen? I was like, yeah, you've seen my presentation. I was like, now my mom's teaching me about like what Elon Musk said. And but this is weird because now this multi-generational discussion, and we've never had this fertile ground to do this, right?
As you rightly said, it was only for the big boys in Silicon Valley with lots of money, with lots of education. They knew how this all fit together.
Yeah. But I'm excited. It's going to be a precarious time, and I think it's going to be painful. Like, I definitely think there's going to be some, I mean, as much as, and I'm very conscious of that, right? Like, as much as I get really excited about this stuff, I'm a realistic optimist. Like, I see a plan on how doing it responsibly, but I'm just like one person, right? And there's other folks like you that are out there trying to educate people. And I mean, I don't know, maybe it's an issue of like all the folks like us need to get together and figure out like, hey, how do we leverage everything to reach everybody? Because this is so important.
I love your concept of the TV show, which is translated into multi-languages. Really get leverage and educate the world.
Yeah, it's amazing. I remember because when they asked to meet with me, I pitched the TV show to their executives, and they're like, I mean, they were literally like, well, no, you're not going to be able to do this and you're not going to be able to do that. I was like, yeah, but by the time we shoot, we will. Like, I had to keep telling them that,
just wait a month and it will be there.
And so at the beginning, it's funny. They just kept dragging their feet. And I just kept sending them article after. And they're like, oh my God, it's happening. And so even now, like, we'll do a shoot. They'll use the technology and it's like, they're amazed. And it's like, I'm talking to my mom now. They're like, did you see this? And I was like, yeah, I sent you that article. It's cool, right? Though it's cool to see people getting excited. I think the interesting thing is going to be when all of the tech, it converges in a way that it becomes so obvious. And we're starting to see that now.
And then it's really leveraged by companies. At the moment, I feel that everyone is sort of playing around. Everyone is trying to understand what's happening and developing solutions. But there will be a point when they really see, okay, now we can use it and boom. And then it will have the massive impact on society.
Yeah.
And there, I see the tipping. I mean, some countries will be slow. I mean, for example, Europe or Germany, they are very slow in adopting new things. And as I said, I mean, ChatGPT is not in the education list. But I see other countries like US really moving fast, moving wise ahead. And there's this chasm also between the countries widening. And we have a global economy. And there I see the challenges.
Yeah. One of the interesting things, so I spent a little bit of time in China, and I was always like, honestly, the way they were developing AI to do some of the things that they were doing with it, I was like, oh man, that is an opposite philosophy of how we should be developing AI. But the US was like falling behind for a long time. Like China was actually starting to have more patents. Like they were going from the imitation copying to actually innovating. Like there was stuff I saw over there and I was like, you gotta be kidding me. Like it was actually really mind blowing. And I was getting nervous for a while until ChatGPT, like OpenAI, released it, right? One of the interesting things about generative AI is it hallucinates, it says crazy things sometimes, but the reason it's accelerating so fast is all of these users are teaching it, right? Now in China though, they cracked down immediately because they needed to control all of they didn't want an AI bad mouthing the Chinese government, right? Like they didn't want it saying things that they didn't want. And so they locked it down. So now they're trying to be this proponent of like going, no, we need to slow down development and whatever, because the way we're doing it in the West, it's like the opposite, because it's almost like folks like you and I are using it and we don't know what we're doing, but we're just figuring it out as we go. And so what if it says some crazy stuff or it doesn't quite work right? What does it matter? But that's very different philosophy than they have. So this may actually be a point where like, okay, if we do this right, like I said, it's going to be painful in the short term. And you can see it. The AIs aren't as reliable. Like it's still astounding, and that it's getting better and better. And as long as we don't lock it down or overregulate it, I think we'll have that chance to have AI developed for the purposes of good. Now, a lot of the use of the AI, like in China, is used for like spying infrastructure and like social scoring and all that kind of stuff. And it's like that kind of stuff terrifies me, because I don't think people understand. Like I've gone through this debate with people before. So because I was in the Marines, I have assault weapons, and there's things that I have, and I have them for very specific reasons. Like, but when I hear people say things like in the US, they're like, the government's not taking my guns. And it's like, I need a gun. So in case we need to rise up against the government. I was like, I was in the Marines. I was like, I don't care what you've got in your house. You are not stopping the Marines. Like, you're not stopping the government. None of this stuff, right? But we're hitting this point where it's like the way we're developing these two technologies, like they really are at polar opposites. And so, like I said, in the short term, as long as we don't overregulate it, right? Like we don't, because that's the downside, is because the AI is learning, and but again, there needs to be an understanding of what it can do right now, what it will be able to do very soon. And that's why it's like, you can't have the attitude of wait and see, right? Because it's learning right now. So if we want the AI to act a certain way, we need our society to interact with it and start teaching it, not just dudes like you and me and business people, right? Like, because then it's all going to be geared to how much money can you make, which inevitably will lead to how many people can you get rid of. Now, if the world is starting to teach this, it will reflect our values. And we should start doing that right now. And that's, if anything, that's one of the reasons we should be interacting with it. Like I was actually one of the guys I interviewed yesterday is from CMU, and I asked him the question because he was saying they're a part of a couple projects with Pinnacle Health, which is a healthcare system here. I think UPMC it might be. And they've now got like the doctors interacting with different agents. Like one is a doctor AI, the other's a nurse AI. And the question that I asked him was, because he's like, we're training it on medical journals and all this. And I was like, well, are you giving it personalities? And he goes, well, what do you mean? I was like, well, I don't want to go and interact with an AI doctor. And I go, okay, doctor, so give me the news. And it's like, you'll be dead in a week. You know, like I want it to have like a bedside disposition, right? And he had never thought like it's as important. The data is as important as the personality.
As personality and human behavior and human way of communicating.
Right. And we need to be more intentional about that. Not like when people are like, well, we don't want AIs doing this. We don't want AIs doing that. I was like, yes, if I'm going to have to work with an AI or I'm going to have to interact with it in some environment, I want it to have an understanding. Well, it's not thinking. The persona and how it interacts with me is just as important. But right now it is just like business folks and techie people.
Yeah, I read that I think it was Amazon, using AI to monitor the efficiency of their delivery people.
Yep.
And then if this not meets the KPIs, the AI is sending out termination emails.
And is that the world we want to live in, right?
Not really, no.
And that was my big thing with the Innovation District, the big project I was working on with humans and robots side by side. I wanted to have kids walking to school and having a little delivery robot going past them. Like I wanted them to see it, because the more they're exposed to it in real life, the more they become accustomed to it, right? And so exposure is like half the battle. The second is they'll be able to say things like, yeah, I don't think it should do that. I think it should do this. So then policies start to change. Now, the other reason that we're pushing the TV show, and here in the US, one of the reasons we picked this time is obviously we're about to enter an election cycle. So there's going to be lots of misinformation. But the one thing that I've realized, especially in American politics, is politicians will never vote for anything unless they think it will pertain to them getting reelected. Right?
Yeah,
so if the public is not demanding intelligent policies, not understanding how the technology works, our politicians will not make the right decisions. Right? And so we're entering this cycle where I actually do think, again, these next 4 to 5 years are going to determine like a very long,
critical,
right?
Yeah.
And so if we're sleeping on it or we overregulate it, because again, this is like you've got countries like Russia and China that understand how important AI is and robotics. Like they get this, right?
And they use it a lot.
Right. And this is kind of what I was alluding to before, where I was talking about having a gun, but not being able to stop like the military. It's like, I don't care what you tell me now. If you're going to compete with the AI and the robots, you're going to lose because they're only getting better, cheaper, and faster. And the question is, are you getting better, cheaper, and faster? And like the answer is no, we are not, right? So this fighting of it and overregulating is only going to hurt us. But I do think as a society, honestly, as a species, we should be making sure that this intelligence is being developed correctly in a way that is going to benefit everyone. I think we're going to be in a weird transitional time that we will make decisions that we will go, all right, we're going to have to revisit these like 5-year strategic plans out the window. Yeah, we're going to have to revisit
yes.
every couple weeks.
Wait a month and this will be there.
Right, exactly. And so I don't know. We're just, as a society and as a species, we're not conditioned to do that. And there needs to be this like...
We are not exponential thinkers.
Right.
We are linear thinkers.
Right. But we can learn exponential thinking. That's actually one of the things people bring me in. It's why now I'm getting calls. So this, you'll find this interesting because it's like another hack. I would find myself, because I was early on one of the only people really talking about this, especially in like middle America in these small towns. I would come out, I would freak people out. They would go, man, this is blowing my mind. And then life would take over and they never would hear about AI again and robotics, and it would drift. And so what I started to do was like, okay, I need to train their browsers. So my email list, like every time I would send an email, it would have a link in there that I knew would start to train their algorithm to start showing them the things that I wanted them to see, which is why now things are popping up because I had them train their algorithm years and years ago. And I realized that's what I needed to start doing. And so like all of that stuff is intertwining now, but that window is going to be gone very soon. Like it's hard to explain to people the speed for that reason, the exponential thinking, right? Like now people are connecting all these dots and they're like, oh, this actually means this. But that kind of stuff should be the things that we're teaching in schools, right? Like we should be focusing very heavy on like, how do we break kids out of linear thinking and bring them into an exponential world? Because then we could be a whole generation of superheroes.
We will be a whole generation of superheroes. I think we should stop by now.
No,
because I think this is an amazing finish.
I mean, I see it like it's interesting because you see like, you know, when I was growing up, you know, the Harry Potter and Twilight and, you know, the very similar narratives. But now it's like, man, the Marvel universe just keeps going. And in an age where attention spans are so short, I ask the question, why are we all looking for heroes? Like, what is it that we're gearing up for? Because this technology is going to give us, it's going to be like magic, like superpowers.
Superpower,
right?
Yes.
And so with great power comes great responsibility. So that's my hope, is that we are the first generation of superheroes.
Yeah. Hey, John. I think we should do another episode next week because we could continue talking for hours.
Yeah. No, it's an amazing time to be alive.
It's been amazing. Yeah. It is. And I thank you so much for sharing all these insights. And I guess people should listen to this twice or three times to get all the nuggets out of this.
Well, if people are...
We definitely...
I was going to say, if people are interested in... I'll send you the links for this. The Tim the Robot Wizard. It's available on...
I will get a copy.
Oh, great.
I will get a copy, definitely.
So it's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, a couple different... or you can get it right from timtherobotwizard.com. If anybody wants to learn any more about the robotics company, you can go to yorkexponential.com. And if you're interested in watching one of my keynotes or longer ones, I have them posted on embracingdisruption.com if people are interested in watching one of the longer keynotes. Actually, on that site, it's cool. I have one of my keynotes that I gave to adults, but I have one of the first keynotes I ever gave to high school students, like post-pandemic, and it rocked their world. Like, because the timeline that I showed was right when they were getting out of college. And they were all freaking out, like, because now they're realizing, like, they thought they were all tech savvy and new technology, and they're like, no. Like, they're not. Existential crises all around.
Awesome. We will put everything in the show notes so that people don't miss this.
Awesome. No, I was excited. This is a lot of fun, Sebastian. I'm hoping that, one, we'll do more podcasts together, but hopefully we'll work on some business stuff and do some cool things together.
Definitely. Thank you so much, man. Yeah.
Awesome. Appreciate it.
Hey, I'd like to make a quick announcement. I've got something exciting to share. As a listener of the High Performance CEO Show, you are already part of a community that values growth, excellence, and pushing boundaries. I created the High Performance CEO Hub, which is a free community where you can connect with me and other listeners, get behind the scenes insights, learn how to improve performance and efficiency, and find accountability partners to grow together. Go to www.thehighperformanceCEOHub.com and join us today. It's free, it's valuable, and it's waiting for you.